You're listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with host Doc Martin. Stay tuned in or call in. You won't want to miss what's happening next. How do you step into your maximum potential? How do you connect your spiritual drive with your physical path? Stick around as Doc Martin takes listeners on a journey through the seen and unseen, the accepted and the unbelievable. Get ready to meet the maximum you the world needs on Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin now. Hi, everybody. I'm Doc Martin, Maximum Medicine, and I've asked Stephan Schwartz to come back on tonight, and I'm so happy because we're not going to talk too much about the science he does, the writing he does. We're going to talk about something that I love to talk about is Edgar Cayce, and Stephan knows Edgar's work better than anyone, I think, or maybe as well as anybody. But when you guys remember the times that you started to tap into the mystical or the esoteric and things that were perhaps considered the occult, and I just remember having some what we would call psychic moments when I was a teenager, and my sister and I would explore. We read the Seth books back, I won't tell you how long ago, and we read up on Edgar Cayce. My grandmother knew about Edgar Cayce. And here is a man, and Stephan will tell you what he knows about him, just miraculous in what we used to call being a psychic. But Stephan has since started to study, and he'll explain it to you, what we would now call remote viewing. So being able to see in both space and time. So Stephan, thank you for coming here today, and thank you for bringing your information and your knowledge about somebody I think that you would probably agree changed the world's understanding of the occult and opened us up to a whole new world, didn't he?
Yes, I think the reason is that not only what Cayce did, but that Gladys Davis, his lifelong secretary and archivist, created a meticulous documentation of it. That doesn't usually get discussed. They just talk about Cayce. But what makes the ARE, or what makes the Edgar Cayce readings, the ARE, that's a different issue, but what makes the Edgar Cayce material so unique is that it went on for decades. He was extraordinarily gifted at what he was doing. And Gladys kept such meticulous records that there's no question about the accuracy or the chronology of events. She took it all down in shorthand, and she kept dates and times, and she kept records of telephone calls and letters and restaurant meetings, and I mean, just everything you can think of. And it taught me a great deal, by the way, about how I've kept my own records, but she kept such close documentation of Cayce that there really isn't anything else like it. I mean, there are people, for instance, Stefan Sovietsky, who was an extraordinary remote viewer, but he was killed during the Second World War. Most of his records were lost, except for a chunk that I was able to get hold of and wrote into a book called The Secret Vaults of Time. But Cayce is quite remarkable. First of all, he was very gifted. Second of all, he did it so consistently, and he focused as it developed. He really is, in a sense, the father of holistic medicine, because people came to him. He began when he lost his own voice and sort of spontaneously gave a session describing how to fix it. And people came to him with medical problems. And he gave instructions about how to resolve them. And it really is, in many ways, the foundation of holistic medicine. It's not that it's not allopathic, it's that it views the entire person as a whole. And so he would give instructions about what to do, and in many of them, I'll just give you one example that always has stood out for me, because it's so typically Cayce. He gave what he called a reading, and I guess I should also say Edgar Cayce was born in the post-Civil War period. That's important. Today we would call them an evangelical Christian family in Kentucky, in rural Kentucky. So this is right after the Civil War. These are people who were not highly educated. They were evangelical Christians. Cayce didn't get much of an education, didn't get past the 8th grade. He really became a photographer. That was what he was trying to be. But then he had these experiences which led him to become the person that we know today. And he had the good fortune to have Gladys, who almost never gets mentioned, come into his life and keep track of what he did. So here's an example. A man comes to him and he says he's got a problem. And Cayce tells him that what he needs to do is to rub his legs with smoke oil. And so the guy goes to the pharmacist and says, I'd like to buy some smoke oil. And the pharmacist says, I don't know what you're talking about. So they come back to Cayce, and he says to them, go into the back room, and on the second shelf, at the back of the shelf, you'll find this bottle of smoke oil. So they call up the pharmacist and they tell him, go into your back room, and on the second shelf in the back, you're going to find this bottle of smoke oil. And the pharmacist said, nah, I know what's in my storeroom. And well, all right, I'll go do it. So he goes back in the back room, and on the shelf, just where he describes it, he finds this forgotten bottle of smoke oil, some kind of healing oil that was actually, if my memory is correct, was actually when his father owned the pharmacy. So he calls up and he says, I don't believe it, but I actually found this bottle, and he mails it to the guy, and he does what Cayce tells him to do, and he gets better. And that's a very typical, Cayce, first of all, what people also don't understand about Cayce, Cayce would go into a trance state, an altered state of consciousness. Now, why did he do that? Well, it took me a long time to understand why he did it. And it's because it gave him a chance to disassociate psychologically. So it wasn't him speaking. it was his higher self. Or to bring it into more scientific modern terms, the evidence suggests we have an eternal self, what religion calls the soul, and it episodically manifests and incarnates a personality. And you choose your genetics, you choose your race, you choose your gender, you choose your socioeconomic background, and what comes across from life to life is information. And when you physically die, when you corporeally die, the body dies, what happens is that personality structure becomes like a chapter in a book, a chapter in the totality of the eternal self. So what we're dealing with is information phenomena. And it made Cayce very uncomfortable to say the things that he said when he went into this trance state. That's why he did it. Because for an evangelical Christian to be talking about reincarnation, for instance, or to be doing the kind of things he was doing, he couldn't reconcile that. So he went into a trance state and spoke, and he said, yes, we have the body. They would say to him, you'll have before you Dr. Sharon Martin at such and such an address. And he would, after a moment, he would pause. He would be lying on a kind of couch. And after a moment, he would say, oh, yes, we have the body. And, oh, she's in a beautiful green woods. And she's got this multicolored dress on. And then Gladys would write all this down and give you a specific example. He would comment on, for instance, what things smelt like, because as we now know from the research, all the senses report. So he would say, "Oh, I smell these beautiful flowers," and then they would send the data she would transcribe the reading, and they'd send it to the person, no matter where they were in the world. And people would write back, or they would call up, and she would take notes. And they would say, yes, the flowers were all in bloom, and the window was open because it was warm, and the smell of the flowers came into the room. It was lovely. And so the question that you would ask is, well, how could he possibly know that? But we now know from remote viewing research, I'm one of the people that created remote viewing, that all your senses report. And that you can get any kind of information if you can do what Cayce was able to do, and that is attain a state of intentioned, focused, altered awareness. So he would lie down, and he would sort of go into this altered state. And this is quite typical. If you look, for instance, at the ancient oracles of the Greek world, or the Egyptian world, or the Mayans, for instance, what you see is that in the pre-Christian era, the cultures of the world, all over the world, understood this idea of this altered consciousness, this eternal self, or the soul, or whatever it is you want to call it. And they would actually train cadres of young people to meditate and to go into an altered state and speak. And they also would disassociate. It wasn't them speaking, it was the gods speaking, or a god speaking. So what you see when you look at all of this, and the Cayce readings, there are about 15,000 of them, is that he was going into this altered state, and he was opening to this eternal aspect of himself. And that when he did that, he could get information about anything. Now, he had a formulation of it, the Hall of Records, but really that's just like the oracles of antiquity. They disassociated, and they had a kind of cultural construct of what they were doing. But that's the cultural construct. When you get past that and you see the universality of this sort of thing, what you realize is what they're doing is they're making contact with this eternal part, the soul part, whatever, of themselves. And that because all consciousnesses are interconnected and interdependent in the unity of consciousness, that you can get any kind of information you like. For instance, because I had read all the Cayce readings, as far as I know, I'm the only person who's ever done that. It took me years. I began, because I came out of an anthropological perspective, I began trying to replicate, in a sense, what Cayce was doing, and to get people to locate archaeological sites, because that was a triple blind situation. That is, they would describe something that nobody knew it was there, and Nora had known it was there for thousands of years, and they would locate it. Cleopatra's Palace, Mark Antony's Timonium, the Lighthouse of Pharos, one of the seven wonders of the ancient world, the Brig Leander, a sunken ship in the Bahamas, Christopher Columbus's caravel from his fourth voyage. I mean, all kinds of stuff. The point being that I'm trying to make is that it was triple blind in the sense that no one knew the answer at the time that they provided it, just as nobody knew where the smoke oil that Cayce was describing was. So it's because when you open to this non-local aspect of consciousness, because consciousness is ultimately is a unity, you can get anything you want. You can go to my personal website, for instance, and watch a film. I filmed a lot of this. And you can watch a guy named George McMullen, who was an auto repair person in Nanaimo, Canada, or Hella Hammett, who was a fine arts photographer in Los Angeles. You can watch them locate a buried building in a buried city and describe exactly what was going to be found there down to 5/16 of an inch. Now, how could you do that? And then do the excavation done not by me, but by other people, archaeologists, and confirming everything that they said. Now, where did they go to get that information? Where did Edgar Cayce go? And the answer is he went into the non-local domain of consciousness in contact with his eternal self, where you can get anything. And in fact, if you look at creative geniuses who changed the course of history, and you ask them, well, how did you get this idea? They will tell you some variation of the same thing. I asked Jonas Salk once as we were walking across the Salk Institute campus, where did you get the idea for polio vaccine? He said, in a dream. Brahms, Beethoven, Mozart said that they would go into this altered state of consciousness, and when they did that, they heard the music. And what they did was just write it down.
But it's
they heard the music.
It's not just geniuses, because I shared a story with you. I was talking to a girlfriend of mine, and she and I are very closely attuned. She lives in Georgia, and she said to me, I've misplaced the $1,200 so-and-so paid me, and I need it in order to pay something coming up. can you tell me where it is? Now, I've never been to her house. I've never I've never been where she lives. And I said, you're asking me to tell you? Oh, I said, you want me to go inside and look. In other words, you want me to have a psychic moment. She said, yes. I said, okay, well, this is the key part for non-geniuses, I guess, and when you're not in the dreaming state, suspend disbelief. So you got to get that critical, academic mind going, what are you, crazy person, out of the way. So you get that out of the way. And I saw, as in behind my eyes, in my awareness, a white room and a sideboard that was white that had maybe five drawers. And I said, it's in the white room. There's a white sideboard in the top drawer. And she said, well, that's usually where I put it. I said, oh, she's actually got a side. And I'm like stunned. And then she said, well, I'll go look there. And then I said, well, the reason, she said, I looked there already. I said, but it's under papers. So later she texted me and she said it was exactly there. And she sent me pictures of her home. And there's all this white, everything's white. And the sideboard's white and it has 5 drawers. So you don't have to be. Go ahead.
No, you did a remote viewing.
So you don't have
That's
to.
That's a remote viewing.
Yeah.
Huh?
You don't have to be a genius.
No, anybody can do it. If you look at, I've tested 23,000 people, and other people have tested, they're just millions of remote viewings have been done by now. And what you look at is that it's like any other human ability. There's a few people at one end who are at the spectrum who are really, really good at it, like the Edgar Cayces. And there are a few people at the other end that just don't seem to be able to get it. They, in doing psychological tests, and I tested thousands of people to do that, people that are highly analytical and don't really allow themselves to imagine things because they're really super rational, they don't do very well at it. But people who can imagine and who can give themselves over to it, the imagining, has nothing to do with whether they're rich or white or black or yellow or whatever. It has nothing to do with their gender. It has to do with the fact, can you attain and sustain intention-focused awareness and surrender the thinking that's normally going on? Oh, yes, it's hot, it's cold, I wonder where it is. Oh, goodness, let's see, how can I possibly answer her? Instead, you give yourself over to it and you do just exactly what you did. That's a remote viewing. That's what remote viewing is about. I'm about to teach a course in remote viewing. Starts on the 16th. Anybody that's interested can go to glidewing.org and sign up, and I'll teach you how to do it. It's not hard to learn, and as you have demonstrated in your own life, when you are able to attain and sustain attention-focused awareness, and you give yourself over to it, and you stop all the cognitive mishmash going on in our brains, our heads most of the time, our minds, then you can get images, just as you did, of the white sideboard or the whatever, and that it's under the papers or whatever. Because when we allow ourselves to open to this part of ourselves, any kind of information is available, because what we think of as space-time is a construction of information by intentioned consciousness. Once you begin to get that there is a non-local domain, that's what people call it psychic, they call it spiritual. Have you ever noticed, for instance, Sharon, that all religions begin because a single individual has a non-local consciousness experience? Jesus goes down to John and he gets baptized. He goes into the desert. What does he do? He meditates and he awakens. The Buddha goes up to an ashram and he's this sort of minor prince and he's taught how to meditate and he awakens. Muhammad goes into the sacred cave of Hira and he meditates and he awakens. And these personalities are charismatic enough that they talk about what happened to them and what information they're getting, and people listen and they write it down, and that's where scriptures come from, and then people study it. That's how priesthoods arise. But all of it gets down to the fact that ultimately, at the core, we all are expressions of non-local consciousness that has created an intentioned personality and incarnated it in space-time, and that you and I existed at the ultimate level before we were born, and upon our physical death we will continue because there is a continuity of consciousness. That's what the evidence shows. I am not talking about, I'm not advocating some spiritual perspective or religious perspective. I see religion as a cultural manifestation of this aspect of the non-local consciousness, because, as I said, if you look at all the people that start religions, they all have this non-local consciousness experience, or more, many of them, and they talk about them, and people write it down, and so you will also notice that all religions teach some form of meditation. Now, why do they do that? And in fact, we know that it goes back to the Neanderthal, who seem to have had an awareness of non-local consciousness, that is, this continuity of consciousness. And the answer is because we are all expressions of non-local consciousness. And we all have this ability, to the degree we will give ourselves, to the degree that we will allow ourselves to stop the chatter going on in our minds and give ourselves over to intentioned, focused awareness. And when we do that, then we can get information about anything because it's all in the database, as it were. It's like doing a Google in a sense. You know, you hold the intention, I'm going to find the $1,200. And you have a way of doing it. There's not one way to do it. There are lots of ways to do it. But you did it. You got into a state of non-local consciousness where you were open. You were in intentioned, focused awareness, and you opened to this part of yourself. And lo and behold, you had an image of the place where it was and the little details about it. And that's what remote viewing is. It's just a kind of secular version of it, because it's not in a religious or spiritual context. But I've watched people locate things which nobody in the world knew existed. They've located them thousands of miles away at specific depths on the bottom of the ocean, buried in the desert, whatever. And when you go to the place that they pick, and you know they tell you exactly what you're going to find, just like your experience under the papers, you find it. Mm-hmm. We can all do it. The question is, we need to give ourselves over to being able to do this, because this is what promotes well-being. And that's what society needs to do. It's not, I'm sure you have noticed and talked about, all religions talk about love. Why? Why does Jesus talk about it? Why does Muhammad talk about it? Why does Buddha talk about it? They all talk about the fact that you must care for others. And the reason is because all consciousness is interconnected and interdependent, and it is to the benefit of everyone when we promote well-being. We are creatures of consciousness. And when we foster well-being, not only for ourselves, but for everyone, everything is better.
So we talked in a show, maybe it was back almost a year ago, and we talked about briefly in the show about well-being. And you were talking about the quotidian choice. And I have, well, especially during COVID, I've said this often, as a physician, it has been unbelievably stressful. And people with wild, disparate ideas about the vaccine, about being tested, so just a stressful navigation through my daily work life. And oftentimes getting aggravated because something seems so foolish to me. But I was inspired by what you said, and I made a vow, this was back this past summer, I made a vow that regardless of how I was triggered by the person, and I'll admit that obviously I'm triggered because I have, my own ideas, and so obviously I'll admit not being very tolerant, but I would do everything I could, regardless of whether the person wanted to follow my advice. If they said something I thought was completely bonkers, I would do my best to have at least some point, preferably towards the end of each visit with each patient, something that I commented on, guided about, advised about, to have a well-being moment in our interaction. To just
Good. You did exactly what you should do.
Well, and here's the result.
I mean, that's what we all need to do.
And here's the
That's the point.
So, yes.
If we foster well-being.
But here's what it did for me, and I'll talk about this selfishly. I had a calmness about me in each encounter. I had a relaxation going into the office where I was like, ugh. Otherwise, it became, and this is going to sound cornball, it became a path of service where I had felt it as a yoke of responsibility previously. It morphed into what I could do in that moment. And I did it selfishly. I felt better doing it. So I can't say I was totally altruistic, but it shifted everything in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Yes, because you fostered well-being, and when you foster well-being, it causes well-being within yourself. If the quotidian choice, as somebody restated again, we did before, but the quotidian choice is very straightforward. Every day you make dozens of little tiny decisions. You hardly think about them. You buy certain things, you go certain places, you listen to certain things, whatever. If you, when you make those choices, always choose the choice that is the most compassionate, the most life-affirming, and the most fostering of well-being, not only will you prosper and feel better as you did, but the other people will as well. That is what we need to do as a culture. The problem that we have in the United States is that we're not doing that. We are torn apart by rejections, hate, racism, genderism, all kinds of things. We are not trying to foster well-being. And when we don't do that, we end up as we are today. I watched Super Tuesday yesterday. I was just stunned at the unpleasantness, the unhappiness, the discord. That's not who we're supposed to be. That's not who the founders had in mind. That's not what they were trying to do. We need to become a culture that fosters well-being. I mean, the reason I do interviews like this is because I try to get this point across. I'm not going to do it, but you're going to talk to thousands of people. They listen to you. You've embodied it in your own life. So other people who are going to interact with you are going to get it. And what we know is that when 10% of a population, whatever the population is, hold a certain point of view, a certain consciousness, that the whole community has to accommodate to that. And so if we foster well-being as individuals and our quotidian choices, we always choose the most compassionate, life-affirming, and fostering of well-being in every choice we make. I mean, my wife and I only buy things from companies that we know are trying to foster well-being, for instance. I went to buy cat food for our pussycat, and my wife reminded me, be sure and make sure that it's not cat food that has sawdust in it, which so much of pet food does, because we don't want to support those companies. And so I went to the pet food store to get the pussycat food, and I looked at all the brands and I picked one, Shiba, that the pussycat likes, and that is made by a company that does not put sawdust in the pet food. And it's those little tiny kinds of decisions, where you buy your gas for your car, where you go, what markets you go to. You know, there's certain big companies we don't shop in because the families that own those companies support racist, genderist activities. We don't want to give them any money. And that's what you have to do. You have to do a little research. You have to become a conscious person. When you become a conscious person, that is, you look at what you are doing and become conscious of what you are doing, you stop buying things that support genderism or racism or religiousism or whatever, and you only support the things which foster well-being. And if we would all get behind that and do that, we'd have a very different kind of culture. And it would be supportive and well-being, because when you foster well-being, as you discovered in your medical practice, you not only felt better because you created a moment in which there was a fostering of well-being, but the people who are your patients felt better and went home and said to their spouses or children or whatever, you know, I went to see Dr. Martin and she did whatever it was you did. And, you know, I just feel better about it. I feel good about that. And so we know that when that happens, that it goes out six how can I put it? 6 circles, for instance. We know that when one friend, for instance, gets a promotion or a raise or some good thing happens, that it goes out 6 rings to improve other people. You don't even think about that, but your activity influenced other people, and they in turn influenced other people. And so it fostered well-being. And it seems like a little bitty thing, but in fact, all those little bitty things compile together to change the nature of the culture.
So I love that. And I saw its value in my own little things in life. So, and it's made a difference. So thank you for that. We have about, I'm going to say maybe 12 minutes left. Let's come back to Edgar Cayce for our last few minutes. And knowing what you know, when you spent 5+ years down at ARE, I guess you were in your early 20s, reading everything you could get your hands on, all of Edgar Cayce's readings. What are some of the key things he expressed for people to do for a healthy life?
Eat, meditate every day. That's the greatest gift you can give yourself, is to develop the daily practice of meditation. Now, I designed a form of meditation based on science. It's called Meditation for Modern Minds. You can get it at my personal website, but there is no one way to meditate. You want to develop the practice of daily meditation. I do it with my wife every night before she goes to bed. It doesn't matter exactly how you do it, it's that you do it, because meditation is the best way to develop the ability to attain and sustain intentioned, focused awareness, which is the best way to make contact with the eternal self. So meditate every day. Exercise every day. He emphasized exercise. Eat healthy foods. Eat only organic food. I do the Schwartz Report, my daily web publication, and I see story after story of what is happening in America to Americans. Do you know that Americans have a life expectancy that's 5 years shorter than most Europeans or Japanese, and it's because of our diet. We eat processed foods. We eat foods that, when I was a boy, we called junk foods, but processed foods, you know what they are. You want to eat, Cayce emphasized organic food. He emphasized eating fruits and vegetables, reducing eating mammals. I don't eat mammals. My wife doesn't eat mammals. That's different than eating meat. That mammals if you think about it, you don't eat mammals. So he emphasized your diet, your exercise, your meditation, your decency and compassion in dealing with other people. The Cayce readings, as I say, there are about 15,000 of them. People get lost in the details. Cayce, when you read large numbers of his readings, you realize that he's basically saying just a handful of very simple things. As I say, meditate, exercise regularly, eat well, be compassionate, and fostering of well-being with the people with whom you deal. And that when you do that, you help make a world that has a higher degree of well-being. And so he gave reading after reading, and he would tell people, well, you do this. As I said, he's the father of holistic medicine. So, he talked about massage. He talked about what today we would call chiropractic or osteopathy. He emphasized Waldorf education. I mean, all of these details, but the crux of the thing is just those things that I said. Meditation, exercise, good diet, being compassionate, and fostering of well-being with everybody. And he did it all his life until he died in 46. And so he would do it. In fact, Edgar Cayce basically committed suicide in service. He was told during the Second War that he was giving too many readings and that he should give 2 a day. But he wasn't. He did up to 16 a day. And it was taking too much out of him. It's what killed him. I mean, he literally sort of committed suicide in service. Nobody ever talks about that either. And his sons, Edgar Evans and Hugh Lynn, neither of whom gave readings, but they organized the ARE to continue. And Gladys kept such meticulous records that they could be studied. And so if you see it in a sort of historical context, you realize that Edgar Cayce came in with a message, and he spent his life trying to share that message, and he did it by proving to people that if they did certain things, they would get better. I mean, so although most of the, not most, but a large percentage of the readings are about medicine, what he's really trying to do is not just give you healing information that would help you, but he's also trying to get you to adopt a perspective on what it is to be a human being and what a human being ought to do. And so in every way you could imagine, he did this over and over again. He talked about earth changes. He tried to look at the future and see what things would happen. It's hard to understand a lot of that because the people that asked the questions didn't really understand what he was saying, and they didn't ask very intelligent questions. There are 2 areas of the Edgar Cayce material which I think are wrong. And I think I know why they were wrong. One is the Atlantis stuff, and the other is the Egyptian Rata story. And the reason that I believe, this is going to get complicated. The reason that I believe that he gave that information was that the people that asked the questions were fanatical about those subjects. And as I have discovered in remote viewing, a thing which is strongly believed is, in a sense, as real as something that actually is correct. Because if a lot of people believe something and commit themselves to that, then it becomes an information structure in the non-local level that if your intention is to respond to the person who's asking the question and they have this fanatical belief in something, what you tend to do is to go to the information structure supporting their fanatical belief. And so those 2 areas of the Cayce material have not proven to be correct. And I say that I thought I got involved with the Atlantis stuff. I found the Bimini Road, which turns out to be natural rock. I found what we thought was an Atlantis temple. It turned out to be a place where fishermen put lobsters and things. He said that the pyramids were built 10,553 years ago. I think I have that right. I may be wrong about that. But in any case, they are. We know who built the pyramids. We actually literally know the name of the man who oversaw the building. We know where he was buried, where he is buried. Cayce was approached. It's because at the beginning, late 19th century, early 20th century, the Theosophists and a kind of early New Age movement, I guess maybe that's the way I can describe it. The people who were following the theosophical stuff.
Annie Besant.
Some of it is accurate again, and some of it is just not accurate. And the people that came to him who had these fanatical beliefs, he tuned in, as it were, to their fanatical belief structures and basically reinforced them. And so that's why those two areas are unlike the rest, are not correct. But the basics of Edgar Cayce, those things that I mentioned, he's just spot on. And we know that because when people did what he said, they got better. And so we know that the information was accurate. When he described certain activities and they took place, we know that was accurate. So he's like all remote viewing. When I've been doing this remote viewing, and I would say that the accuracy level is between 75 and 83%, sometimes as high as into the 90s. And that's because I have experts evaluate every statement. So it can get as high as the 90s, but typically it's between, say, 75 and 87% accurate when I do remote viewings with people.
Stephan,
because
apologies, I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry. We're out of time.
Oh, sure.
But I love talking.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on.
No, that's okay. I'm sorry we're out of time. I've loved this. I love hearing what you know from somebody who was amazing, just amazing. And to know that we all have the possibility of tapping into that. And so I will have on the video when we post it, the links to your Glide Wing course and the links to your website. Thank you for the research you do. Go ahead.
Would you put my podcast up, please?
Okay.
YouTube, schwartzreport.net.
Okay.
I'll send it to you, Sharon.
Okay.
But I would appreciate if you put up my podcast, because I am trying to talk about exactly what you and I have been talking about. And I'm sorry to go on and on about, but I'm in the middle of working on a project.
No, I love it. I wish I had more time. Maybe you can come back another time and we'll keep talking about this great stuff.
Sure.
Thank you for being here tonight, Stephan. Emily, thank you for holding the backfield for us. And I'm Doc Martin on Maximum Medicine, and thank you for being with us tonight. You've been listening to Maximum Medicine Radio with Doc Martin. Tune in next time while the doc talks health, spirituality, and the impact your beliefs have on every part of who you are, body and soul. Doc Martin unpacks the challenges we face as human beings and teaches callers to open the door between the scientific and the mystical. To learn more about Doc Martin and Maximum Medicine, visit www.sharonmartinmd.com.